We're told that you beat young men until they bled. Why did you do that?
In 2017, Channel 4 News brought John Smyth's abuse to world attention,
I'm not talking about this.
triggering an independent review into the Church of England's handling of allegations of his abuse from the 1970s to Smyth's death in 2018.
Well, we've spoken to these victims who say that you beat them so hard that they bled.
Former Social Services Director Keith Makin was the man charged with carrying out that review, and it was devastating. It found as many as 130 men and boys were abused by Smyth across 3 countries over 4 decades, and that multiple opportunities to stop him were missed.
With the knowledge I have now, I know that senior leaders in the Church of England knew about his abuse, and somehow they saw fit to allow him to relocate to Zimbabwe.
In 1982, a secret report into Smyth was drawn up by a Cambridge vicar called Mark Ruston. But, Makin notes, the recipients of that report participated in an active cover-up. In 1984, Smyth moved to Zimbabwe, where he was able to set up summer camps and continue his abuse. In 1992, a 16-year-old boy called Guy Nachuru died at one of those camps. Smyth was charged with culpable homicide, but the case fell apart. In 2001, Smyth moved on again, this time to South Africa, where he lived until his death. But another opportunity to stop him was missed in 2013, when allegations of abuse were reported to Stephen Conway, then the Bishop of Ely. Conway wrote to the Anglican Church in South Africa, raising concerns about the risk Smyth posed to children and adults. The Archbishop of Canterbury and his then chaplain Joe Bailey-Wells were also made aware of the allegations, but there was no formal referral to police. The Makin Review said Bishop Conway was in a potentially powerful position to explore this further, to reinforce the referral to South Africa, to ensure that a police referral had been made, but he showed complacency in his handling of the issue. Bishop Conway says he did all within his authority as a Bishop of the Church of England, but acknowledges that he did not pursue it as rigorously as he should. Jo Bailey-Wells says she regrets not doing more to verify the assurances given to her or query assumptions. Both say they believed the matter had been reported to the UK police.
Good morning, everyone.
Justin Welby said today he was leaving on January the 6th. But this week there were separate allegations that the Archbishop of York, Stephen Cottrell, had also presided over a cover-up involving allegations from a former vicar abused as a teenager by a priest. The Archbishop of York denies the allegations, but survivors continue to press for a clean sweep at the top of the Church of England. Well, earlier I sat down with Keith Makin for his first interview since his report was published. I began by asking him what he thought about the impact of his report.
I have to say I'm very pleased with the impact it's having. There's 2 things I wanted the report to achieve, and one is to get the victims' message across firmly, and I've threaded through the report the victims' experiences, and that has come across very strongly, I think, and also to have an impact and to help to bring about change within the church procedures. And I think both those things have been achieved.
Well, amongst the impacts, of course, was the resignation of Justin Welby. Was it the right decision for him to resign, do you think?
I think from the victims' point of view, it's the feedback I've had, I'm in touch with a number of victims, is that they thought it was the right outcome, really.
If you look at the criticism in your report, you know, former archbishop, multiple bishops, senior clergy, some of them criticised much more severely than Justin Welby, and yet I don't see anything happening to any of them. Does that suggest that the church is still in some denial in its response?
I think one of the issues is the church, and to use a colloquialism, the church is marking its own homework. I think church officials have been aware of the issues that I've been raising. I did report in several people during the course of the review happening. They were aware of issues, they've looked at those issues, but they have not been effective, in my opinion, in bringing about change.
Let me pick up on one of the bishops who you raised serious concerns about, and that's the former Bishop of Ely, now Lincoln, Stephen Conway. You said he was in, and I quote, a potentially powerful position to explore concerns about Smyth further to reinforce the referral to South Africa, to ensure that a police referral had been made, but he showed, in your words again, complacency in his handling of the issue. No formal referral to the police was made. Expand on that. How big a failing has there been in that case?
The problem was that a process didn't start into exploring whether John Smyth still posed a threat in South Africa.
Well, quantify that. How big a failing is that on the part of someone who's a senior leader in the church?
I would say in terms of not bringing John Smyth to justice much earlier than the start of the police investigation, much earlier than actually happened, which is far too late. In those terms, yes, that's a serious failing.
A serious failing. And if there had been a kind of consistent approach taken, if what the Archbishop of Canterbury did or didn't do was sufficient to merit his resignation, what the Bishop of Lincoln, previously Ely, did or didn't do should have prompted the same resignation, shouldn't it?
I think it could be argued there's a logic to that, yes.
And
but I've got to stress, it's not. My report didn't.
You don't make
recommendations
about.
on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No. A lot of people have said to me, well, based on what your report unearthed and the devastating nature of what you found, that the police should be called in over anyone who helped cover this scandal up. Is that appropriate in your view? Are there grounds for that, or does the law at the time not allow for that?
I think we're looking at a big span of time, I do think that there needs to be consideration given as to whether police action needs to be taken. I actually don't know the answer to that.
But you'd like that to be considered?
I think it must be considered, yes.
There's also allegations in recent days from a former vicar abused as a teenager by a priest that the Archbishop of York, who's the number 2 in the church obviously, Stephen Cottrell, also presided over a cover-up. And, you know, the Archbishop denies the allegations, but survivors say this is part and parcel of what is needed, a huge sort of overhaul of church culture. Do you agree on that point, that, you know, the Archbishop of Canterbury's resignation is just the start of this kind of clear out?
I think the church does need to look very carefully at absolutely everything within its remit. I'm not in a position really to comment on any individuals within that, but if the same kinds of conditions apply to any other senior official, bishop or whatever within the church, then yes, the same should unfold.
So anyone in the church, however senior or junior, who's been involved in a cover-up needs to get out, basically?
I think it needs to be taken very seriously and to be examined. The appropriate action taken, and in some cases, yes, that may include them having to step down, yes.
If this was any other organisation or institution, if someone had combined to cover up abuse of this nature, they would resign, wouldn't they?
I think there'd be an expectation of resignation, yes.
Keith Makin, thanks very much. Well, joining me now from Newcastle Cathedral is the Right Reverend Helen Ann Hartley, Bishop of Newcastle, who called on Justin Welby to resign after the publication of the Makin report. Bishop Helen Ann, you started the ball rolling, really, were pretty pivotal in Justin Welby's decision to resign. Plenty of his allies say actually he could have stuck it out. What do you say to them?
I think the Archbishop was right to resign. I think that the Makin report is of such a serious nature in terms of the safeguarding failings that anybody named in that report, including the Archbishop, who has been shown to have failed when it comes to safeguarding, ought to resign, at the very least to start off with, step back from whatever public ministry they occupy, pending an independent investigation.
Right, so, I mean, anyone criticised should resign. That includes multiple bishops, including the Bishop of Lincoln, formerly the Bishop of Ely, then.
I think anybody named in the report who has been shown to have failed when it comes to safeguarding does need, at the very least, in the first instance, to step back from public ministry. And there does really need to be a commitment to transparency, accountability and independence. I mean, Keith Makin's interview there is a damning indictment of the Church's response. And With a heavy heart, the Church says that it's putting victims and survivors at the heart of its response, but actually it's causing further trauma by its ongoing internalisation of process and also obfuscation of accountability and independence. And that is what we must move to with some urgency.
Well, I mean, you know, what does it say that Justin Welby has quit, but multiple others named in the report, including bishops, haven't, including, just to come back to the former Bishop of Ely, now Bishop of Lincoln, he had exactly the same information as Justin Welby, yet he's had a reflection interview instead of quitting. If you'd been criticised in that way, you'd have gone by now, would you?
Yes, I would, and any clergy person in my diocese, of which I have jurisdiction, the Diocese of Newcastle, would in the first instance be asked to step back, and we would conduct an investigation, or rather I wouldn't, but I would ensure that there would be an independent and thorough and appropriate investigation conducted.
So how is it then that these men apparently seem incapable of taking responsibility?
I think sadly the Church is beset with a culture that internalises entitlement and a sense of its own narrative. Many of the responses that I've had in the last week have come from partners in civic life, in healthcare, in higher education, in many other institutions and sectors, where they're telling me that my stance is absolutely correct and that there does need to be transparency and accountability, and the Church sadly seems incapable of doing this, hence why we need to move to independence in our safeguarding.
Yeah, many people have made that call. I mean, you're a brave woman. You called for Justin Welby to resign, and he then did. There are growing calls for the Archbishop of York to resign as well over separate safeguarding concerns. Should he consider his position too, in your view?
I can't speak to the detail of that concern. I would need to see it myself. I have read the Makin review. In a sense, that's what we're speaking about tonight. But I think any senior leader or any clergy person holding a licence in the church or lay minister who has been shown to have failed when it comes to safeguarding needs to consider their position, be held to account by an independent body and step back if necessary. There has to be a change of culture in the church.
Well, just to expand on the point about the Archbishop of York, you sent him, you accused him of sending a pretty strongly worded letter about the suspension of his predecessor. And just to quote what you said that his letter signified a wider and systemic dysfunction of how the hierarchy of the Church of England has dealt with matters of safeguarding. You accused him and the outgoing Archbishop of Canterbury of using coercive language. I mean, it was really strong stuff. Have you had an apology from either of them?
I've not heard directly from either Archbishop. I think when I received the letter, it felt coercive to me. I think particularly addressing me by my first name and then signing the letter with their full titles. The language and the inference in the letter spoke to me strongly of a tone that was coercive and an inappropriate exercise of power. And I've not had an apology from either Archbishop directly for that.
Well, I mean, they deny any wrongdoing. But, I mean, if there's a clear out of the scale that you're talking about, it's a constitutional crisis for the Church, isn't it?
You could say that, and I think in some ways this does need to be a watershed moment. You know, the Church cannot circle the wagons and turn in on itself. It truly has an opportunity, I think, now to look outwards, to be held to account, and to be a church that truly is safe for all people, building on the excellent work that's happening on the ground already that I can speak of in my diocese and parishes here in the cathedral, that is being undermined by what is going on at the centre.
Bishop Helen Ann Hartley, thank you very much for joining us. Well, from Lambeth Palace, that's all we have time for tonight. Back to you, Krish, in the warm studio.